Mother, how long have we been traveling?
Approximately 24 days.
Do you know where you are?
I'm in a dream.
You're in my dream. I designed every part of this place. It's not a theme park, but an entire world.
Hello, my name is Clara, but you can call me Mother. And you are listening to Yutani, the podcast for all things alien, AI, robotics, sci-fi, and technology. Hello, this is Clara, but you can call me Mother, and welcome to another episode of the Yutani podcast. Today we're discussing the Westworld Minisodes, and we are up to episode 2. Firstly, I want to introduce my co-host for the Westworld Minisodes, Mike. How are you, Mike?
I am doing great. It's a pleasure to be back with you here again and talking about Westworld some more.
Cool. I really enjoyed breaking down the first episode. I didn't realize there was so much stuff in the first one, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what's in number 2.
Definitely, yeah. The first episode alone has so much set up in it that could be a movie in its own. And now that we have 9 more episodes of this to explore this world, it's really exciting. And I hope that people who haven't seen it before will watch it and then come listen to stuff like this, ours or other people's analysis, and really get the most out of this show, because it's the little subtleties that you come back to that you really enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just give a quick shout out to another podcast which is much more organised than us that did this as the show was being released, called Beyond Westworld, and they've got a Facebook group too, and I really enjoy the sort of discussion and input that goes along there, so well done, guys. And also the Westworld Reddit, where everyone's just really nice. There are people who are curious about the show and ask, what's going to happen with this character and that character, and everyone was just really great in not giving spoilers and just telling them to watch more episodes, which is I've never really encountered that before in the fandom, so that was really nice as well.
Yeah, and going through these old episode posts on Reddit too, it's fun to look and see what people were thinking, where the story was going based on the evidence. Especially in this episode, you get so much new stuff that you already were thinking about the first episode, and now it's layered again in this episode. It's really cool.
Definitely awesome.
You ever thought about whether this is really the life you want? Do you ever dream you're someone else? And that none of this matters.
First cab off the rank will be the title of the show, which is called The Chestnut. What do you think it means?
Well, I know just from my background studying random history that there's a lot of chestnut symbolism in cultures, particularly with Native Americans in the Northeast. There's a fertility or an abundance connotation with them, just because they had prolific production of chestnuts. But it also has meaning with fertility and longevity and invigoration. So it's something that can reproduce quite frequently, which I suppose in this episode it could be related to something as simple as the host's loops that are constantly reproduced, or guest experiences, or the caretakers creating narratives that are constantly reproducing something that either guests want or what they think guests would want. So that's kind of my take on it.
For me, I looked up the mythological relevance of the chestnut, and it has some sort of relation to Zeus. So, Zeus being God. So we're following around Ford in this episode for a fair bit, and he's doing his godlike thing, going around the park and interacting with the hosts, or kind of just exploring it himself, his creation. I always saw it as something which gave a certain sense of the significance of his power within the park. It comes up to a lot of things, such as even the saying that old chestnut comes from a really old melodrama called Broken Sword back from 1816, and it was after a character exclaimed, I've heard that story before, you don't need to repeat it again. And you're right, in this branch of repetition with all of the park, whether it's the guests or the host experience, it's all been done before. All these stories have been done before, and I'll bring this up later on when we talk about Lee Sizemore and what he tries to contribute and what Ford decides to shoot down, because because I think that has something to do with it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I also think that the chestnut being attributed to Zeus, it also had some sort of standing Norse mythology as well. It's just like many sorts of mythologies actually cross over with it. The name actually comes from a town which is known for growing the chestnuts. I thought it was really interesting because they kind of end this episode on Ford arriving at a town that he had been at before, which was the place of the massacre. So I thought that was really interesting to draw a comparison to something that had been done before, something that he only knew of, no one else knew. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds like that's the intent that they never said, right? Like to name it, because the chestnut, I never really understood why they called it that, but what you just said makes so much sense that I can't see like why they wouldn't make that the meaning of it, you know?
Yeah. So we'll get to that part because that's toward the end, but I've got notes on that as well. Next up is, we think we're hearing Arnold's voice saying, "Wake up, Dolores, do you remember?" So this is the reveries in action. So we are in the place of the host, and we're hearing this voice, and it's driving Dolores to go out into the field and dig something up. I think it's really interesting to actually put us in the position of the hosts and experiencing what the reveries are, because when you're looking externally as a technician watching these hosts act out these interactions with the reveries, they seem either quite minor, like the touching of the lips, or actually talking to Arnold, which is like full-fledged. It looks like they're going kind of crazy. What did you think about opening the show with Dolores being woken up? Did you initially think that it was Bernard?
Oh, absolutely. I don't even think I don't think Arnold's been introduced yet either, has he?
No, not yet.
Yeah. So I mean, I had no idea. I thought it was, when I first saw it, I thought it was Bernard speaking to Dolores in another session, and that Bernard was somehow going behind Ford's back to accomplish a goal that we are just only now being introduced to. But the whole time it was, at least that particular opening, this scene is Arnold's old conversations with Dolores. So and now we're getting the time jumps that are introduced in this episode. They start off right away because this is something that happened even before William's timeline is introduced, which I think it's setting up the entire course of why Ford is doing what he's doing, and kind of the origins of the park. But it's not, you don't know yet.
Yeah.
I really like that.
I really like looking back at it now. I'm really taking a lot of care in listening to the voices that Dolores is hearing, and Maeve as well. So with Dolores, this time, I really do feel like it's perhaps Bernard's voice, but later in the episode we get that voice, which is a combination, an amalgamation of Dolores' voice, Bernard's voice, and Ford's voice, which is kind of like this weird murmuring sort of voice. But this one here, I think it being Arnold's, is actually a very tricky way of Ford manipulating Dolores, because he said he was the one who put the gun outside. He was the one who wanted her to remember what memory was tied to that gun, and I think that also propels her memory of remembering what happened with the Wyatt narrative in the town when everyone had been killed by her. So I think there's a lot of strings being pulled in this initial scene, but I definitely thought it was Bernard's voice initially, because we don't know who Arnold is. So I think it's very, very clever, like being able to revisit these episodes and actually thinking about what was the intention behind this, and and it makes you start questioning. It's really interesting. It makes you start questioning your reality within observation of the show, which is really great.
Super meta.
It definitely lends itself to rewatches, which is really. I'm definitely enjoying like picking apart all of these different things on the second time round.
Absolutely, yeah, and there's so much you miss the first time because you're still trying to catch up with what just happened, and then something else happens that deepens an understanding of another aspect of the show, and it cascades into just so much stuff going on that it demands you watch it multiple times. And I think art, especially in the form of a film, the classics are ones that you can watch over and over again and still find something different or gain some new meaning or find a different interpretation about it. And TV shows now especially are becoming movie-sized projects, and more than that even. They get the budgets of films, and not only can Hollywood make something like this, it's actually more explored and more in-depth in a show like Westworld than it would be if it was just an hour-and-a-half long movie. And the original Westworld is great for a multitude of reasons that we can talk about in a later episode. But the show really takes the concept that was in the book and expands on it in such a meaningful way that it outshines the show by so much. Or, I'm sorry, outshines the movie by so much. So it's really cool that they decided to take this seriously and they could just make it an easy, theme park full of androids, one goes evil and starts killing everybody, which they did in the original.
It could have been a really corny sort of Western. I can't think of any sort of realistic portrayal, sort of like, that Western sort of theme working. But like, there's good stuff like, True Grit and things like that. But every other TV adaptation of a drama has always been a bit corny. It's had some sort of treatment where it looks very polished and sort of very dramatic and overacting and silly. Whereas this one, it doesn't. Or when it does, it's all intentional.
Yes, and movies, like you're saying, recent things like the Lone Ranger reboot film, for whatever reason, they made it just so ridiculous, and they had a chance to make something that was really, really interesting, and then they cast Johnny Depp as a Native American, and you're like, okay, well, that's kind of strange, but I'll see what happens, and then the movie just doesn't do anything interesting. And, old westerns like John Wayne and all the famous ones, you get the symbolism of like, oh, well, he's wearing a white hat, so he's a good guy, and he talks like this, so he's a good guy, or he's a bad guy, and I like that Westworld takes those tropes from westerns and not goes with them, but flips them on their head or makes you think about it like, hey, maybe it's not literally so black and white, like with William's choice, any guest's choice of what hat they wear when they enter Westworld. And Ford in this episode even wears a black hat, but at least up until this point, we don't think he's a villain. And in my opinion, I don't think he is a villain at all.
Yeah. Exactly.
You think you've got a handle on what this is going to be? You have no idea.
Which brings us to the next part. So when Dolores is asked to wake up and do you remember, we get a flashback. So flashback to William or Billy and Logan on the train heading to Delos headquarters, which is connected to Westworld. Part of the conversation that Logan has with William is about what the capabilities are of the park and what you can do. At one point, Logan's just, pushing Billy's buttons constantly, like just poking him to see his reaction, to get something out of him because he's so reserved. And then Billy, William, I keep getting them mixed up, but it's
interchangeable.
Interchangeable. It's the same guy, but we know him as Billy at the moment. And he tells Logan, fuck you. And Logan says back to him, that's the spirit. And I thought, like, is that an intentional Blade Runner reference? Maybe, maybe not.
I'm sure it is. There's so much related to Blade Runner in this, like, they couldn't resist. Is it on the train where he says, you think you have a handle on what this is going to be?
Yeah.
Because I love that line, and I think it's Westworld. Like, that's what it is. You think you know what you're going to get into. The show takes you for a spin, and you're like, what the hell is going on? I don't even know who I am anymore. And I'm watching the show, just sitting down, trying to enjoy it. And it's making me, like, it's a show that is asking you to question yourself, too, and what really matters to you, and how did you become the person you are. Because William, this is his, like, I don't think William knew who he wanted to be or what kind of person he was before he had this experience at Westworld, and that's the whole point of showing it, right? Is who does he become out of this? William's just my favorite character. It's so exemplary of humanity, and we're trying to find out who we are. And with Westworld, you can do that by, it's like a sandbox, but real life sandbox, like a game, and it's so messed up, but at the same time, I think I would want to visit it if in real life, if it was real.
Yeah, me too. If I had the money, it sounds really expensive.
Yeah, it sounds like, like upper class, tier 1 people can get in, but just knowing, like, I can go to this place and be who I think I am and see where that takes me as I go on these journeys. And I really identify with William especially in this episode, but throughout his the old Westworld storyline. I think it's fascinating, and there's some friend, quote unquote, who's trying to get you to experience life, but he does it in such a way that it. I don't think Logan turns William into the villain he becomes completely, but he definitely has a huge influence on it.
Yeah, I think if anything, Dolores is a big motivator for all of the things he does. He ends up compromising a lot of his morals just to save her. And, he uses that excuse to save her, but then when he realizes that she doesn't need saving, what was it all for? What did that reveal to him? Which is interesting. So I've noticed in the beginning of this as well that the Westworld logo is different. So when they arrive at Delos headquarters, so people watching the show this first time round, they could visibly see that this is a different time period. There's just little hints like that. And when they explain about starting in the center and working your way outward, it kind of reminds me of the Divine Comedy again. So you've got Dante and Virgil going through hell and experiencing all of these things like, mild crimes and stuff like that. And as you go deeper and deeper and deeper into hell, things get so much more worse. And the sort of things that people have done and all the punishments that are waiting there for them in this hell. It's really interesting because that's something that was brought up in the previous episode by Abernathy. You're in a hell of your own making, and all the devils are here. And it kind of feels like, that they peddle this world as a place without consequences and without, consequences or anything, but it's not a place without sin. And there's it gets really full on as the episodes go on. There's lots of debauchery, murder, in a way, devil worship and stuff like that. So it's really interesting, the sort of journey that Billy takes to become the Man in Black, and Logan in a way is Virgil leading him through hell, and at the end being schooled by Dante / Billy. So I think that's an interesting turn as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and you said start from the center and go out, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
That kind of is like a inverse of the maze, where you don't start from the center in a maze. You start from the outside and it gets more complex, then you get to the end. So it's almost like an unwinding of perhaps the guest's own belief of their self-conscious, or not their self-conscious, their consciousness, and they exit the maze that they thought they knew, and they go into a new one, and they figure themselves out, just like Ford is now wanting the hosts to do.
Yeah, so it's interesting how you bring that up, because the hosts are trying to find their way out of the maze, and the man in black is trying to find his way into the maze.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
On the train ride, because we're presented with the sort of experience that the newcomers slash guests have, they're confronted with a guide, a person, and then everything that they have is bespoke made, so this is obviously a very expensive venture. And Angela, and she's tells Billy, all you do is make choices, which is interesting, because that's something that the hosts can't do. That all of their choices are pre-written, which we've seen later with Maeve and reading the tablet, and all of her next moves are all thought of for her. So it's an interesting way of presenting what sort of freedoms the newcomers or guests have, because we know later in season 2 that is just an illusion, that humans are destined to make the same choices because of the experiences we're raised with, and it brings up the sort of idea nature versus nurture and stuff like that.
Well, and do you think that's the ultimate point of Westworld, is trying to show us that, not that there isn't free will, but that oftentimes where you think there is, you're either being manipulated from an outside source, or you've manipulated yourself into believing something?
Yeah, it makes you really think about, like, when you make a decision, what sort of factors do you take into consideration when you do make that decision? What is autonomy and free will, and what happens when you take that away? Can the results still be different? I guess in Maeve's case it is, because she decides to stay for her daughter. But for William and Logan, it looks like they made the same mistake, especially William.
Yeah, absolutely.
Welcome to Westworld.
There's that part where Billy says to Angela, "Are you real?" And then she says, "If you can't tell, does it matter?"
Yep.
There's a lot of suggestion behind that, because when we first meet her, we think that she's human, and she's just, showing people around. We know for a fact later on that she's a host. Did you think that she was a real person when you first saw her?
That's tough, because she seemed, I don't know, that actress seems really, like, she's pretty and really dressed well and stuff, and it felt a little, like, too good to be true type thing, where it's like, whoa, this person is so, like, I don't know what the word would be for that, but, like, eye-catching, and maybe they chose a person for that specific reason, but I had thought she was a host, just because that makes sense for the caretakers to put hosts in that kind of position. And then especially when she offered to have sex with him, I was like, okay, I don't know, like, I just don't think they would have their employees, like, sign an agreement. It's like, yeah, you have to offer to have sex with all the guests. It's like, that just doesn't make sense.
That's true.
Yeah. So as soon as she said that, I was like, okay, I'm like 99% sure that she's a host.
And it's kind of freaky as well, because initially I did think that she was human, up until the part where she said, if you can't tell, does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
Even offering to dress him, and her saying, you don't have to worry about what most people do. It really brings you into the sort of idea of what Westworld is trying to achieve.
I was going to say that when Ford is with the child in the desert later on in the episode, I thought that was kind of the first time where you're like, whoa, I thought that was a person. But I'm glad you brought up that Angela is a human as well. And that's brought up later too in season 2, isn't it? Where Logan meets her and he has to guess who the host is, and turns out that everybody in the room was.
Yeah, exactly. That was mind blowing for him.
Oh, man, that was amazing.
And a bit for me too, because then it made me look back at all of the episodes and I was like, oh, who was a host and who wasn't?
Yeah, that's what's so great about this episode is it kind of finally puts in you maybe thought about it in the first episode, but it wasn't a big deal. And then this one, you're like, oh my god, I thought that person was a human, and they're not.
Yeah.
You know, and what great foreshadowing for for Bernard's character as well. It's so awesome.
Their lives are blissful, purer than ours. The hosts are the ones who are free. Here, under my control.
There's a flash forward again. So we're back into the present day. Bernard and Elsie are discussing the issues with Abernathy and the origin of the host era, and it's very clear that Bernard is aware of what's going on, and they're kind of letting it be because it's Ford that implemented the reveries. And I was questioning myself. I didn't know whether did Ford actually create the reveries, or was it Arnold that had noticed it was a natural error that happened, and then Ford was just trying to keep on rolling it back? Or was it something that he actually started?
What it sounded like from what the story eventually tells us, it sounds like Ford was going a direction of like, I care about the profits that this is going to make, or I care about stuff that is not what he cares about now in his old age. I think he regrets what happens with Arnold, and I don't think they definitely didn't have a great relationship. I don't think it's shown or implied. And I think that maybe both of those things. Maybe he stopped it at first, and it was Arnold's idea, and then later on Ford regretted his actions and allowed it to happen, and maybe improved on it as well.
Yeah, I still can't decide who started it. Yeah, maybe Ford was re-implementing something that he'd seen in the past, or he had started the whole cascade, because that's kind of the narrative that he wanted to start even before Sizemore presented his new narrative.
There's something different about you.
I think there's something wrong with this world. Or there's something wrong with me.
After that discussion with Bernard and Elsie, we have Dolores arriving at Sweetwater, and there's that flashback again with the wolf, and everyone dead. So we know that isn't Sweetwater. That's actually the original town in which they were testing out all of the hosts. You said you had some research as to what the wolf means in that, symbolically.
The wolf has so many meanings in so many different cultures. German and Norse mythology, it's death and destruction, which I think is apt for what we're shown on screen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's probably what they were going for with this particular instance. There's plenty of other, you could almost make it fit any theme you'd want it to, like high intelligence or loyalty, danger, violence. It could be a range of things. But I think in this particular instance, death and destruction, and just maybe, I don't think it always means that throughout the show. And honestly, it probably, if they're going for this whole nothing is black and white thing, then it probably means multiple things at the same time.
Yeah. I wanted to just go back to Bernard and Elsie discussing the issues with the error, saying that it could be spread, could be contagious. I think that's kind of interesting, because in the second last episode of season 2, that's exactly how they try to eliminate the hosts. It's by spreading a contagion through Wi-Fi locally using one of the hosts. So I think it's very clever, mirroring season 1 and season 2, and just folding it in half, episode 2 and the second last episode in season 2, talking about this sort of like contagion and virus being spread. It's very, very clever.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't even realize that. And don't they use Clementine's husk to spread it, like the one of the horsemen of the apocalypse? So that was cool. that was really cool. And that symbolism with the death and destruction and Dolores, and then we've got Clementine doing that. I think that's really awesome. Excellent. Yeah. And in our post for this episode, we'll definitely make a more comprehensive look at different cultures and what wolves mean to them, and how that could fit in with Westworld.
These violent delights have violent ends.
In this part as well, Dolores says to Maeve when she's in the town, because Maeve walks up to her while she's frozen in this sort of reverie, she says, these violent delights have violent ends, which is something that her father had said in the previous episode, and we speculated on what that could have meant. But there's no speculation here. She's definitely talking about what has happened in the past and what had came to pass, and it is going to happen again. There's no doubt about it. So it's interesting watching this and kind of seeing this a bit more clearly the second or third time around, whereas in the first time around, you're just thinking, oh, she's just saying that because her father said that. So, well, what did you think Dolores meant?
Well, I think, one, it's an example of what we were just talking about, where it's spreading kind of like a contagion, where first her father says those words, and she starts to become self-aware, and then now she's saying it to Maeve, and this is where Maeve really starts to, I don't want to say lose it, but actually, like, find it and figure out what's actually going on. And as we'll see later, that's certainly true.
Flashback to 30 years ago. William ends up choosing the white hat. So it's interesting again, like, because that's Angela says to him, you know, this is a world of choices, and you just have to make a choice. And he chooses the white hat because that's the sort of person he believes he is. It's interesting how Logan, when he enters the carriage, he zips up his pants. So you can kind of, without saying much, it kind of tells you what he was doing while he was getting dressed.
Yeah. Well, I like that little detail too, that the guests wear clothing authentic to the time period, but they also have those modern amenities like a zipper, where
yes.
you know, you're still allowed to be a modern person, but you're going to be like playing this game for who knows how long.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing to note is that Logan says directly to Billy that this place seduces everybody, and it's interesting how Billy reacts to that seduction from Angela, turning her down, and Logan, he obviously was presented with that seduction and he just took it up. So it's possibly everyone's given the same sort of scenario, but all of them react in a different way.
Yeah, and I think that's Ford's idea, like that's what he wanted out of this. He's on the side of free will for both the guests and the androids. You know, you're supposed to discover either what you love or what you want to be. Even if you might know who you already are, you're going to find something out about yourself by interacting at the park. And then in this whole season, he's trying to do the same for the hosts, but under the table, and it's awesome. It's super cool.
Which brings me to the next part. Logan says, this place answers the question, who you really are. So it's... I guess they're trying to really hammer home the sort of the idea behind Westworld and what it could be, like this journey of self-discovery.
Yeah, it's what you choose to be. It's what you want out of it. It's like if you're assigning purpose or meaning to your life, it's really what speaks to you. I don't like the idea, and I think a lot of people think this way. Well, a lot of people do think this way, where there is no meaning of life at all. It's either you go down the nihilist path and say nothing matters, or you say, well, you know what, something about this really strikes me, and I want to follow that, or I want to understand and believe in that and speak of it. You know, I get, it makes sense why religion is so appealing, because you get answers to all these questions that either you have to discover on your own and you might never truly discover them, or you can live in a comfort knowing that you don't really have to ask those questions for yourself. If you don't want to, you're given it by something greater than you, so to speak.
Flash forward to present day, where the Man in Black frees Lawrence. You know, they have that sort of interaction where Lawrence now reveals, I guess, how much he knows or doesn't know about the maze, because that's what the Man in Black is chasing. He gives Lawrence Kissy's scalp, which is kind of gross.
Yeah.
We see the maze etched onto it, and now we know from watching season 2 that etching in the scalp actually has nothing to do with Ford, but Ford may have utilized it as part of his narrative to drive the Man in Black in a certain direction.
Yeah, that was also confusing to me, because that Ghost Nation soldier, or not soldier, but tribe member, I can't remember his name, but it's really cool. He starts putting that on, right? He's making the drawing because he saw it at the old town.
Yeah, and he's trying to spread the word that that this place is a lie, and that, you know, people come back from the dead and that sort of thing. It was to prove a point. So he started drawing it everywhere.
Yeah, and Arnold must have known, and he must have utilized it, because not only does he talk to that person in season 2, but later on in this season he's talking to Ford about it. Or I'm sorry, he's talking to the Man in Black about it. Ford's talking to William about it in the bar.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think he's utilized it, and that must have been from Arnold, the drawing and the idea. So I think it's only natural that Ford would take it upon himself to resurrect that idea and spread the word.
To riff on it.
Exactly.
The next day opens back at Sweetwater with the piano playing again, and this time it's playing No Surprises by Radiohead. What did you think about this choice in the song for this day? Do you know that song well?
Not too well. I'm sure you know it better than I do. Just based on the title alone, it speaks to me that it's like nothing is ever truly new at Westworld because of all the loops and the constant repetitions. It feels to me, and when I do know something about the song. I know that when it plays, and if you start it again, it like kind of it's done really well. Like it plays off itself very well. But I don't know. What you probably have a lot more on this than I do.
I did a bit of research, and some people believe it could be a song about the baby boomers.
Interesting.
Yeah, like I was thinking, why would someone write about that? But if you look at the lyrics, it talks about having a heart filled up like a landfill, so it's full of rubbish. So, you know, you want all of these things that probably aren't that great for you, that aren't fulfilling. So that they peddle Westworld as being a place to fulfill your dreams. I feel like when they play the song, they're actually saying that whole thing is a lie, which we know it is. The place was created to blackmail people.
Yeah, in the worst, most invasive way possible.
So I'll read a couple of lines from the lyrics. It says, "A heart that's full up like a landfill, a job that slowly kills you, bruises that won't heal. You look so tired, unhappy. Bring down the government. They don't speak for us. I'll take a quiet life. A handshake of carbon monoxide with no alarms and no surprises." So, you know, even in that first chorus, it's really, you know, it could say a lot. In a job that slowly kills you, I could even imagine Ford just saying that, you know, it's kind of taken a toll on his soul, doing all of these things, playing God.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that he's doing this, he's helping the host seek consciousness as a way to repair what he's created, in a way. Something that tortures them so horribly. At least put that suffering to good use.
And I think as well, saying that bring down the government is, you know, to say something about the bureaucracy of Westworld. We know later on that he ends up being retired, so to speak, and they kind of give him this honorary role of being on the board, but just being a decoration, a relic of the past. So he doesn't want to be a part of that. So I think No Surprises is kind of an irony being played here, because he's got a surprise in store for the board and for Westworld and the changes that he's going to bring about.
Oh yeah, and a surprise for humanity, especially. I mean, he talked about it in the first episode where he says that humans have kind of reached the point where there's nothing left, and that we implied that we need to be replaced by something better than us, and maybe these hosts can be that thing, something that's been suffering for so long, that knows what it's like to suffer. Maybe they won't make those choices that we made. But then, of course, in season 2, we do get genocide and horrible violence. So, I don't know. Maybe it's still pretty bad.
You think I'm scared of death? I've done it 1,000,000 times. I'm great at it. How many times have you died?
After the song plays, we have Maeve. She delivers this sort of speech to the guests that come into the brothel, and it's a really a credit to Thandie Newton's talent to be able to deliver the same lines so differently multiple times in different ways to the way that she's been supposedly programmed as a host, which is very entertaining to see this happening. And I've seen sort of like people rehearse lines before. The only other time I've seen it done in a TV show was in Seinfeld, when Kramer, is it Kramer? Or was it George? So. George gets that line, "Oh, these pretzels are making me thirsty," and he keeps on saying it in different ways, and they kind of laugh at it. But then Thandie Newton as Maeve delivers this line, you know, about coming to the new world and having that voice in her head, and every single time she delivers it, it's so different. It's just really amazing, like the range of the actors to be able to portray themselves as hosts and playing a part. It's really, I don't know, immersive. I really enjoyed it.
It is, yeah, and it's like seeing all the little things that are different on William's arrival to Westworld, where he bumps into a guy that Teddy bumps into, and instead of the posse going after Hector, it's a bunch of Union soldiers passing out recruitment flyers, and then with Maeve, you're having just little, even those subtleties. It's almost like the reveries in a way, where you come back because you know your experience is not going to be the same as it was last time.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a point where Maeve is trying to remember what that voice said to her. She has this moment where she like looks off into nowhere, and she remembers the time at the farm, and she freezes. Then we get brought back into where the technicians are maintaining her and trying to find out what was wrong with her and why she wasn't being so-called productive. And it's interesting, like, what people think others should do to be able to achieve, and what differences, I guess, was it Elsie made to Maeve that made her more effective. It kind of plays into the whole how we are manipulated by friends or family or teachers or idols into what they think we should be, and how it doesn't work for everyone. I think it's really interesting how Maeve interacts with all of these little adjustments to her personality. You know, she's a madam, she should be more aggressive, or she's this, she should be more that. I liked seeing all of these tiny changes to her personality, and what ended up being saving her, which was just being a bit more laid back and not so full on. Because we see her interaction, I think, 2 other times with people, and they were just very uncomfortable.
Yeah, the first one, right, is where she stares off, and the guy's like, "Oh, all right, I'm out of here." And then the second one is when she's super aggressive to that woman.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Yeah,"
and grabs her in the crotch, and it's like, oh.
Yeah, yikes.
It's not comfortable at all.
Yeah.
And then the third time, it's a charm, because she puts Clementine's hand in the person's hand, and off they went upstairs. So, victory. Yeah,
and in a way that does seem like what a madam is supposed to do too, is like get her girls to go and do the job rather than herself.
Yeah.
Not that I'm like an expert in prostitution or anything, but like, that just seems to me like that would be what it would be like.
Yeah, it's more believable and it would make sense.
The photograph alone couldn't have caused that level of damage to Abernathy, not without some other outside interference.
You think it's sabotage? You imagine someone's been diddling with our creations?
It's the simplest solution.
Just Occam's razor. The problem, Bernard, is that what you and I do is so complicated. We practice witchcraft. We speak the right words. And we create life itself. Out of chaos. William of Ockham was a 13th century monk. He can't help us now, Bernard. He would have us burned at the stake.
Later on, we get this flash of Ford and Bernard. I think it's not a flashback. Maybe it's present day.
I think it's present, yeah.
Present day, okay. Wow, it's so confusing.
I know, it isn't. It's like when you watch it, and for the first time especially, it strings along real nice, and you don't really think about it. And now when we're talking about it and we go back and watch it, it's like, okay, wait, now we're in the back, and now we're in the future, now we're in the present, and it's like going back and forth so much.
And then season 2 just adds another layer even more, so you don't even know whether the Man in Black was reliving his loop or whether it's him going through the park the first time. So who knows? Who fucking knows?
It's gone so far. It's just like, oh my god, just give me something I can cling on to, please.
I can tell you this, I am not going to make a timeline for Westworld, not until the whole series is finished. No. Because who knows what they're going to do next? They're probably going to say, oh, actually, all of that was one loop in the future, and
We retired the 2 hosts in question. You taught me how to make them, but not how hard it is to turn them off.
You can't play God without being acquainted with the devil.
God, it's just going to be ridiculous.
But I'm excited. I'm definitely going to be watching it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not going to stop me from watching it, we'll say it.
So Ford says to Bernard, this line stood out to me, you can't play God without being acquainted with the devil. Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
All of these things that he's doing to the hosts, to people in the park, I would definitely say that not all of it is black and white, especially when you come to a place where you're playing God. So I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, how could it be black and white when if you're all knowing and all powerful, then you have to make specific choices that are, no matter what you do, are going to make someone suffer or something's going to be done incorrectly. There's just no way around that, you know?
It brings me back to something that I found really interesting in episode 1 when Ford was talking to Bernard again, saying, call forth Lazarus from his cave, and asking Bernard to indulge Ford with allowing him to make mistakes. So he is inkling that Bernard is perfect because Dolores created him, and that Ford is flawed because he is human, and that, Bernard should allow Ford to make mistakes because, he knows he's a flawed creator. So I found that line really interesting. So saying that, you can't play God without being acquainted with the devil, that goes for Dolores as well. She's a creator. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a very loaded sort of line.
Yeah, there's so many layers to that. Well, and I hope that, it reminds me of the engineers and in Prometheus and Covenant and their role of being both creator and destroyer and what it might take to be like that. I really, really hope that in a future Alien film we get more of that engineer perspective of what it might be like to be something so powerful that to what you create, you are, for all intents and purposes, a god, but yet that you're still so organic and so flawed That what would you have to deal with in that kind of situation?
Yeah, I guess in a way they haven't tied it up in a way that we can only experience that sort of thing through David's eyes. I don't know whether
incredibly warped eyes,
yeah.
right?
Yes, very warped eyes. And I don't know whether the engineers are ever going to play a part again. Like, I know Ridley Scott said he was going to do that with Alien Awakening, the next movie, but considering the very big drop in the amount of money willing to be put into the project, I think that maybe he might have to compromise, and it might not be about the engineers and might be more about David and the humans.
I mean, that'll be good, but it's still such a tragedy.
Yeah, it is. It's a pity. I just hope someone out there, producer's gonna, like, give him some funding so he can make all his dreams come true with this last movie.
Really, yeah. That's all we really are asking for.
There's a deeper game here. Something the person who created it wanted to express. Something true. And that game cuts deep.
Now we have another time travel, and we go 30 years back to William and Logan arriving at Sweetwater. And the sort of, like you mentioned before, the sort of immediate interactions and observations that you have. We have this scene in Sweetwater played out many a times to us. So we've seen it through Teddy arriving at the town and bumping into the gunslinger, and then we have William doing it, and then Logan telling the gunslinger to go fuck himself.
Yeah.
It's obvious that it's a type of loop that, you know, when this sort of like scene is played out, it's played out to ad infinitum, and you know, to a point where it can become too predictable. So they do like chop and change little details, such as who goes hunting for the outlaws and stuff like that. And I believe they change it later as well for the shootout to mask them taking all of the hosts at once. So that would have been another change as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well, is this that leads into them dining in the restaurant? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Where Logan just straight up is about to shoot somebody who he doesn't even know is a host or a guest, just to prove a point.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how awful that character is? Like, in a good way, you know? Like, he's just such a despicable garbage person.
He's a douche. An absolute douche.
Yeah, huge. And the actor does such a good job of making us hate him, and I love it.
Yeah. It's just... just everything about him. He kind of reminds me of Holloway, in a way.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, cocky. And thinks he knows everything, and they're like, oh, well, you're gonna find out who you really are, because I've done this, so, you know, get fucked. And, like, he just sucks so much.
When I was reading, on another, tangent, when I was reading The Cold Forge, and I had to imagine Dorian, I imagined, Logan from Westworld.
Oh, it's perfect.
Just fits him so well.
God, I know. Yeah, he's like the epitome of trash human, and he's driving this man who I think William is a good person at heart. He needs to figure some stuff out about himself, and the person he's going with is this narcissistic, just completely unempathied person, like a husk of a person. And I'm glad he gets a little more development in season 2, because in this, I want to see him die so badly. So bad. I was hoping William was going to kill him somehow, and it never happened. So, anyways, but, and then he drives the knife through the host's hand, and it's just such a horrible reminder of how, like, real the world is, but also you can do whatever you want, and no one's really going to step in to do anything about it.
Yeah, it's very, very visually violent, very abrupt, depending on the sort of surroundings you have. Like, even when Teddy dies, and Maeve is standing, like, right next to him, about to cheers him, and then he gets shot at the head. And she just gets a handkerchief and wipes up the blood. For her, that sort of violence is... they're not supposed to react to it. They kind of, like, take it in their stride. Whereas other people, in the park are very horrified because, you know, they're guests and they've obviously never seen that sort of stuff before. I wonder if there's rules against doing that sort of stuff, because Sweetwater is a beginner town. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wonder how many like families and kids are there. But obviously they probably wouldn't go into a brothel. Maybe it's free for all there, but it just seems very, you know, I would think that you're not allowed to do too much violence in a place like that.
Well, I mean, we get the whole shootout from episode 1, where everyone's just dying in the streets, though. You know,
That's true.
Well, I don't think I think there was a thread on this too on Reddit. It was somewhere. It was being discussed, but I don't remember seeing any kids exiting the train to Sweetwater or any at all in the town. So I wonder if they mention it. I think either in the first episode or some other episode where they say like, oh, that part of the park is like, you know, for tier 3, like people who want the violent experiences. I think children and families maybe go to a specific part of the park where it's more handheld and just completely PC and friendly, you know?
Yeah, I believe that too. I think it was when Dolores was painting by the water and that kid goes up to her and says, "Are you real?" So possibly, yeah, they you know, disembark on a different part of the park and it's just a bit more, you know, PG.
Yeah, because I'm sure like a mom and dad aren't gonna like meet up with Angela and she's gonna say, "Oh, you guys want to have sex?" And it's just gonna be like, you know, no problem. Like I hope that's not how it is anyway.
Oh, who knows in the future?
Yeah, maybe it won't matter. I don't know.
Yeah. There's an interaction we've come to between Dolores and Arnold. He says, 138 encounters. What I noticed at that point, that the basement that they're in is empty. There's no refitting. It's all abandoned. So I can't tell whether this moment she's actually having a conversation by herself or she's having a conversation with Arnold originally. What do you think?
I don't know. it's just like
it's a bit like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just like my head. I don't know. I think it's one of those things that can be interpreted in both of those ways, and you're right in both of them. I'd really probably have to watch it again just to get an idea of where I'd stand on that. But is there one of those that you're leaning on more than the other?
I think she's actually talking to Arnold at that point. I'm trying to see if there is, because I know they've gone really deep into this show. I wanted to see whether the actor who betrays Arnold or Bernard has certain mannerisms, and whether you can tell those mannerisms apart when he's playing one or the other. Because Dolores brings that up in season 2. So, yeah, it's just made me wonder whether we can tell him apart from human and not human. But I guess, as Angela said, if you can't tell, does it even matter? Right,
yeah. And that's something that line is spoken in so many of these android-type movies or shows or books, you know. Like where Kay asks Deckard if his dog is real, and he's like, "Oh, I don't know, ask him." It's those things, you know, it's like... It doesn't matter in the end. And in Blade Runner, that was the whole point. And in Westworld, I think it was the point. And we could talk about this later, of course, because it's completely different. But I think they kind of made it like, no, it does matter because hosts can be better or worse than us. But now that I'm saying that, maybe it doesn't matter because they can be better or worse or the same as us. So what is it even, like, there's no difference, really.
So I heard a theory that someone said that there are host versions of all the guests that are in the park, and the reason why the Man in Black is drawn to Lawrence is because he is supposed to be the host version of him.
Oh my god.
So, you know, Lawrence has a wife and a daughter that he never talks about, that you only meet in this episode. It's really interesting how the Man in Black, it's the same sort of thing. You know, he never mentions his wife and daughter and what has happened to him, and any encounter that people try to talk to him about it, he kind of like, you know, you're ruining my holiday, shut up. That sort of thing. So that's something I want to revisit later on, because we obviously haven't seen much of Lawrence, but I think that's a really compelling sort of theory that could be the case.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I don't know if I'm reading too much into it or if it's symbolic, but the Man in Black shoots Lawrence's wife and kills her in this episode, but then in season 2 he rescues her, and there's a lot more exploration in the second season of him kind of coming to terms with his family. I think it's a nice like turn for him in that moment anyway, and his wife commits suicide in real life, so it's like I don't know, it's interesting to think about.
Yeah. And then there's another time travel to present day.
Of course.
Where Maeve and Clementine are talking, and Teddy is checking on Maeve to see if she's alright. So I don't know whether that was a way of the technicians actually monitoring the hosts within their loops. You know, are you okay? You know, you're not getting any sleep? You're having fun with them dreaming? Stuff like that. So it seemed like a lot of the questions that the hosts were asking each other are the sorts of questions that the technicians would ask them. So that was interesting. I don't know whether that they were copying the technicians, or that the technicians questioning them through the hosts, or the hosts were just initiating conversation to practice their linguistic gymnastics.
Yeah, and what I don't quite understand is later on, I think Elsie says something about how their nightmare, they aren't allowed to dream, but their experiences of their past selves come in as nightmares. Is that something that they changed in between the first and second episodes?
So that's supposed to... So the dreams are a way of covering up the past narratives, mistakes, just in case they weren't erased properly. And I think the reveries give them access to those memories instead of them as dreams. So when they have a moment when they're remembering something, their nightmares they're experiencing it as a reverie instead. So yeah, that's really interesting, because Maeve remembers the farm, and she's like completely spacing out, and Teddy's like, "Are you okay?" So yeah, I find that very interesting.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense when you explain it like that too. I thought maybe that it was something. I thought maybe the reveries and the nightmares were the same thing, and they just called it something else. But that makes a lot of sense.
Teresa and Bernard start discussing their board member / guest, who ends up being a very vital character in the last episodes, because that's how Dolores escapes the park. I think it's really interesting that even just on the second episode that she's mentioned. So I don't know how far ahead they actually wrote season 2. I think they did it immediately after season 1. So it's interesting to get her tied into the narrative for season 2 and have her appear in season 1 so early on, even just through a mention.
Yeah.
Yeah, what did you think about that?
Yeah, for me it feels like they didn't take much time between the first 2 seasons, and they had, maybe they even wrote out a full story, at least between these first 2 seasons, where they could say, okay, well, here's where we're gonna end the first season and begin the second one. So yeah, I agree with you.
I think it's very handy as well because of all this time traveling and jumping, because they can kind of move things around as much as they want. and have stories play into each other.
Yeah, and I think the first season did a better job of making it not obvious, but you can at least follow along with all the reveals that start happening. Whereas season 2, I felt like sometimes they did it just to do it, and there wasn't a good reason to do so. And that's for another time, of course.
Yeah. Then there's another time travel to 30 years ago. William and Logan eating dinner, stab a host. Logan has an orgy.
Oh yeah, he's with a woman, and then there's a man and another woman on the bed.
Yeah, I think you can really see Logan's character from the fly zipping at the beginning to his, insatiable appetite after dinner. I really, in contrast with that interaction that Logan's having with the host, I really appreciated the sort of interaction William and Clementine had in the room. Clementine says to William, "Real love is always worth waiting for," and it nearly brings a tear to my eye every time I hear that, because it's something that I think is really prevalent in Blade Runner 2049 as well.
Yeah.
When they're talking about joy and talking about Deckard's daughter. So, even though Kay had suffered a loss through losing Joy, he was willing to fight for a love that really existed between a father and a daughter, which is between Deckard and Stelline. And even it was a love that was unrealized as well. That sort of to love someone, sometimes you have to be a stranger. So, yeah, it's just all sorts of levels connecting, I feel.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to do a Blade Runner series soon.
Yeah.
somehow we always come back to it, and it's just something that's begging to be discussed. So let's not forget that.
Yeah, maybe we can do that in between. I think it'll be a good tie-in, and it'll give us a bit of a break as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea.
Awesome. And then, is there anything else that you could think about with that sort of situation with William and Logan? It's really interesting, the hand-in-hand eating dinner and stabbing someone.
I think Logan ended up being scared, and from his family life, especially from season 2, we realize it's just he has a lack of empathy and love in his life, so he takes what carnal pleasures that he can when he can, and Westworld is the perfect place to do that. And even before the fly zipping, he's stepping off the first train with William, and he has his arm around a dude, and he's holding the hand of some woman, and they walk off. And then it's presumed that they're, they have sex.
Yeah.
So Logan's all about those carnal pleasures. Maybe he's realized that that's who he is, and that's all he'll be to his family, and he's convinced himself of that. Whereas William, with his conversation with Clementine, he's a lot more gentle and thoughtful. He isn't going here just for the fun of it. He's here for a reason, and I don't think he realizes that he figures out the answer to his questions that he has 30 years later. 30 years later, he's looking for the reality of choice, if there even is a reality of choice. And here he's already finding it. He's chosen to come here. He's chosen to engage in meaningful conversation and not just, fuck around.
Yeah, he's chosen to abstain in a way.
Yeah, he's saying no to these things that are they should be irresistible for most people. I think, anyway. I think a lot of people would be doing what Logan is doing, or what, the guy who shoots, given the chance, and the guy who shoots Hector in the back of the head, and is oh, look, now I'm famous, and stuff. People want recognition or respect or pleasure, and I don't think William's looking for any of that. I think he's looking for self-realization.
And I think it's also interesting that when Clementine says real love is always worth waiting for, she's talking about William's fiancée, but in a way, we know that his real love is Dolores, and whether Dolores was real or not, the love between them was real. Or at least William's love toward her was real.
Yeah, and in that situation, what he should have pulled something from that experience that he had, but instead he decided that it meant nothing because it could just happen again and again and again. So what's the uniqueness in that? What is the special purpose in that? And so he's left without any purpose, seemingly. He chooses not to see any purpose. He willingly goes out of his way to avoid any meaningful reasons to do what he does, and he becomes this horrible, horrible person.
His middle name should be Nihilism.
Yeah, really, yeah. All he talks about is how things don't matter and how there's no choice. And all this time, that's all he's been doing. Then
there is a time travel after that sequence. So many. So now we're to present day, where Lee Sizemore is stressing over his new narrative, bashing in the nose of that native Indian that he's created.
Yeah. That's
very violent, and I was very confronted by that, because I've got a friend who's got a big nose, and I was like going, ow, that looks so painful.
Well, exactly, I have a big nose. And I was like, oh my god, dude, horrible. Like, you do so much damage to someone with a big nose. It's like, god, why'd you do that? Lee Sizemore to me is probably second runner-up of most despicable character, at least in this.
Yeah.
And it's so obvious he doesn't understand or contemplate like the amazing like technology that's before him. He's trying to satisfy like a commercial like weird enterprise for himself. You know, he I don't know. Everything's artfully crafted, but they're not human and they're not sentient, and he can do whatever he wants to them. It's like a molding clay, you know, for an artist or something.
Yeah. Alright, so unfortunately we had some technical difficulties, and the second part to the Chestnut was actually, somehow it got deleted. So now I don't know what I have to do. I think I just have to do the sign-off and continue the rest in the blog, in my notes. And I really hope you can forgive us, because we did record it, but unfortunately half an hour of recording has just disappeared. So unfortunately there's nothing I can do about it. And I hope that you will join us for the next Yutani podcast, where I hope by then all of our technical difficulties have been sorted out.